the showdown with Russia. Secretary of State Blinken said today the U.S. would be relocating embassy operations from Kyiv to Lviv due to the accelerated buildup of Russian forces, stating, quote, "I have ordered these measures for one reason, the safety of our staff. We strongly urge any remaining U.S. citizens in Ukraine to leave the country immediately." With me now is Terry Moran on the ground in Ukraine, along with ABC News senior Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez. Terry, let's begin with you and start with that announcement that the U.S. is moving its embassy and drawing down embassy staff. Other countries, as you know, as you've reported, have followed the U.S., encouraging citizens to get out of Ukraine. Is there any sense of panic or fast movement there on the ground out of the country?
You know, Phil, not at all. Not only is there no sense of panic or fast moving, the cities, both Kyiv, where I was, and Lviv, where I've come, like where the U.S. Embassy and many other embassies are coming, this part of Ukraine has only been part of Ukraine since the end of the Second World War. Russia doesn't have a traditional claim on it. For most of its history, it's part of Poland, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Putin is thought will kind of leave this part of Ukraine alone. We'll see if an attack does come. But this is where people are coming, but not many. That's what's striking. I expected our flight to be jam-packed and the lines at the airport long. It's a very brief flight away from Kyiv, but it wasn't. The airport was rather quiet. What you see here, certainly among Ukrainians, is a sense that they know this game, this Russian game they believe it is, of ferocious intimidation. And in fact, they have been at war with Russia out in the east of the country for 8 years, a war that's cost the lives of 14,000 people. But they sense here that this is all part of a geopolitical game. Russia trying to make claims on NATO, NATO pushing back, and they're a pawn. And their president, Vladimir Zelensky, keeps telling them, do not panic. Panic is the best friend of our enemies. And that's what we're seeing here, really. It's an almost surreal contrast between the intense seriousness based for sure on their reading of the facts on the ground, the disposition of Russian troops, perhaps signals intelligence, human source intelligence as well. Between that level of alarm, and it is almost entirely on the surface, life going on as normal here. Sure, you just have to ask a single question, and you hear it. You hear this anxiety, but no one is rushing for the borders right now.
And Terry, you talk about this geopolitical game. Let's bring Louis in now. You know, with no definitive movement except movement toward the border, everybody's left to sort of read into every movement, every statement from each side. Louis, talk about the decision to move the embassy. You know, people hear that and they think there could be something imminent. How big a move is that, and what does it really entail?
Well, Phil, that is a really significant move because we had already heard that there were non-emergency personnel that were going to be moved out of the embassy, that there was going to be a core diplomatic staff, but that the functions of the embassy were going to continue. Well, that was just 2 days ago. Fast forward to today, and you've got this announcement from Secretary of State Blinken saying that, no, we are going to relocate this embassy to Lviv, where Terry is right now, because that's a more secure situation. And they state because of the concerns that there might be a Russian push into Ukraine. Very significant move there by the U.S. State Department to do something like that. It's not something they actually do in situations like these. They always talk about leaving somebody behind, but in this case, they are totally moving the operation with a very small operation that is going to remain out to the western part there in Lviv, just miles from the border with Poland.
Terry, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed the nation today. A lot of talk about that. He spoke about reports that an attack is coming perhaps February 16th. That's in 2 days. We just heard Admiral Kirby say that the Russians could move, and I quote, with little to no warning. What was his response, and what do you make of it?
Well, President Zelensky was mischaracterized. His quote was misquoted, and it was out of context. And I'll just say, CNN really messed this up because they're a very large news organization. And a lot of people were reporting that Zelensky says the invasion is coming on the 16th. That's not what he said. What he said is that news reports, as Louis will report, that the Pentagon never gave a date. But in some news reports, probably from some of the briefings that the Pentagon and the president has been giving to foreign leaders as well, that date, February 16th, emerged from the background of those briefings. And so it was reported in various news outlets that the U.S. was predicting an invasion would come around the 16th. What President Zelensky did was take that date back, because his argument is this is all designed to create a panic. This is all designed to either intimidate from Russia's point of view or to back Russia down from the American point of view. And Ukraine is caught in the middle. So he is trying to take the February 16th date back and say that date now is our celebration of our national unity. He wants everybody to fly the flag. He wants a spirit of love, right, and solidarity, to unite his country. And that's what they're going to do. He said, you can all talk about invasions. You can all continue to panic the country. I'm going to try to unite the country this way. There's something quixotic about it, really. And remember, this man, what, 2-3 years ago, you know, was a stand-up comic and a sitcom star playing the president on TV here in a sitcom. Now he is the president. And the Russian bear, the United States and others based, once again, on facts they see on the ground, you know, is about to attack them. And his answer is, it reminds me a little bit of the hippies who put flowers in the barrels of the guns of people. That is his response. But it also has, that's to diminish it, it also has a rallying effect, a strengthening effect. There's no question that Ukrainians that I've talked to have had a lot of complaints about their government over the years, with good reasons. One of the most corrupt governments in this part of the world. But they are coming together. And I think Zelensky is tapping into that. He's looking for a nonviolent, non-provocative way to strengthen his country and to send the message, we'll be okay. Because panic, as he says, is the best friend of our enemies.
Louis, Terry, as you just heard, very eloquently points out where some of the messaging could be coming from inside Ukraine, the Ukrainian president himself. But the question I have for you is the U.S. on the same page as Ukraine right now? We've seen mixed messages, even President Zelensky disagreeing with President Biden at times. What's happening with that right now?
You know, Phil, as we just heard from Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby, he talked about how the Russian troops continue to flow in, over the last 24 to 48 hours. You heard at the very end there a response to our colleague Matt Seiler's question about what kind of capabilities. He went through the entire list of every kind of capability that the military could have if it's going to launch an invasion. And he talked about armor, he talked about ground troops, he talked about air support, he talked about sustainment, which means that if you're going to carry out a large military invasion, you need to sustain those troops on the ground for an extended period of time. He said, we're seeing that. We're seeing medical forces arrive. Everything that you can imagine is coming onto that border area. You even have a naval force, because there are concerns that maybe Russia could be preparing an amphibious landing in the southwestern part of Ukraine, potentially to recapture Odessa. There are a host of military options that U.S. officials have pretty much presented as what Russia is willing to do, and you're not hearing that from President Zelensky in Ukraine. As Terry said very well, there's a different image being presented in the ground in Ukraine about what is going on. As Terry mentioned, this game that they're familiar with on the part of Russia. But the United States and its allies in NATO, they are seeing something very different. They are sharing this with Ukraine, and what they are seeing is concerns that this is going to be something different. It's not the usual game. And what they want to try to do here is prevent an invasion. So the goal here, we're seeing some extraordinary information, Phil, being released by U.S. officials over the last 2 weeks. We're talking about classified intelligence that is being declassified so that the American officials can push back on Russia's plans. We are hearing all about these false flag operations. They want to call the Putin's bluff. And so this is pretty extraordinary what we're seeing.
Louis Martinez, thanks so much for the reporting. We appreciate it. Terry, you are inside Ukraine, and you know better than most that words really do matter, especially in a tense situation like this. You've got more.
That's right. And we want to talk about the diplomatic efforts here, which also can be more than talk, can be a demonstration of strength. And in that regard, the new German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who was just elected a few months ago and is facing this tremendous challenge. Remember, Angela Merkel, was Chancellor of Germany all those years, went through so many crises. And here's the rookie chancellor, if you will, facing this. He spoke with President Zelensky of Ukraine, once again showing that solid front of NATO, and to discuss that and the impact that it might have on what is, I call it a game, but it's a very dangerous game right now. I want to bring in Mick Mulroy, who's ABC News defense analyst and the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. So, Mick, let me begin with that. We see, once again, a pledge of support. There has been a parade here and in calls of NATO leaders pledging support. Every once in a while, when we were in Kyiv, we heard cargo planes coming over, heading out to the east, where the main theater of the action is expected to be if there is war. NATO countries flowing arms here, smaller arms, nothing gigantic, but real arms, serious ones. How much does NATO solidarity matter in President Putin's decision-making, do you think? And how much, we're a long way from the end, but how much, what kind of job do you think Joe Biden is doing right now in handling this situation?
So, Terry, I do think that the actions that NATO and the U.S. has taken so far have proven to be effective, and quite frankly, much more effective than our actions or inactions in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia, or in 2014 when they annexed Crimea. So whether it's the diplomatic effort to make sure everybody, as best we can, is on the same, quote unquote, sheet of music, whether it's the military repositioning and positioning forces in the event that NATO activates a response force, or whether it's the intelligence services and the intelligence that they're collecting that, as you mentioned in your report, that we have been declassifying, so that we can talk to what we know the Russians are doing. So I think to date, with a few hiccups, we have been very effective, both the United States and NATO, in our messaging and our actions toward this aggression of Russia's in the Ukraine.
And yet, so far, there is no withdrawal of Russian forces or de-escalation. In fact, quite the opposite. There are still ships coming into the Black Sea. There are still boots coming onto the ground, and more than boots. There's tanks and other equipment coming from the Russian east. They're being taken out of their normal strategic disposition within Russia, and he's got, some say, 60% of his combat battalions here around Ukraine. And so that is increasing, and I think as a lot of people look at the situation, they wonder what would happen if there was a full invasion. Certainly that's one of the reasons we're in Lviv, because that scenario is frightening. And I just wonder if you could step us through, as you look at the disposition of Russian forces, if President Putin decided to go all the way, what would that look like?
So I think only President Putin knows what he's ultimately going to do. But what we can all see is he's developed the capacity now for a full-fledged invasion. And that includes not only the assault forces that would be in the initial phase, but also the occupation forces. That's when you see a lot more of the logistics and reserve and National Guard, their version of it, troops being activated. We're also seeing that a lot of the equipment and personnel are being shifted from these assembly areas out to what I would call attack position. And that's indicative of an actual invasion. So to the point of your question, I think you'll see a lot of preparation of the battlefield, which will include cyber attacks, denial of service, electronic warfare to jam radar systems, for example. And then you'll see, just like when we went to war in Iraq, you'll start seeing a lot of airstrikes, you'll start then seeing a lot of artillery, and then you'll start seeing the movement of ground forces. This is, and if you recall, I'm sure most of our listeners do, the United States, when we invaded Iraq, we did so with 180,000 troops. The invasion was not that difficult. The occupation was extraordinarily difficult. And I think that's what the Russians are going to soon find if they choose that path forward.
Absolutely, Mick. So, some of the Ukrainians I've spoken with have laughed at the notion that 130,000 Russians could take over. That may be one thing, but occupy a country the size of Ukraine with its population of tens of millions, angry and patriotically resisting any kind of occupation. That would be very difficult indeed. Mick Mulroy, as always, thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.